So, how can agencies find their dream clients? Definitely a question I think that keeps a few people awake at night time, but is also the reason why people set up agencies and work in agencies. So, I'm absolutely delighted to have Robert with me today. And Robert is just the guy to speak to when it comes to finding those dream clients. How you doing, Robert?
I'm doing very well. Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Thanks for joining. Appreciate it. So busy times, but it's good to take a bit of a step back and have these kind of conversations. I think it's only when we do this that you know we look at the longer term, look at really reason why we do what we do, why agencies do what you do, and there's a chance to kind of reset and reflect. And I think the stuff that we've talked about before this, our green room chat has been great. So let's start off with just a bit of an intro to yourself.
Yeah. So my career at large, I've been working with agencies for a little more than a decade now. My career started off in accounting. Actually studied fine art myself in college, and then had a creative business myself, and realized that wasn't for me. I'm a massively analytical, data oriented person. So I've rededicated sort of my what I was born, my natural abilities, to helping the creative mind being able to do what they do best, and focusing a bit more on what I do best. But I work exclusively with agencies to help them essentially simplify their business, get back to what energizes them, excites them about what they've chosen to do with their lives, and be able to create a more scalable business.
Lovely. I think it's really important. So I think to remind ourselves why we do what we do. Whether you're a founder of an agency or whether you're actually an employee of an agency or even client side, is take those little steps back and take a sense check of why we do what we do. So I think yes, definitely this is for agency leaders, agency founders, but I think also there's going to be some useful nuggets here. I think for anyone who's well at work, especially in the agency world. So I mean, you probably answered this question lots, but what do you find are the typical challenges that agency owners face?
Well, there's three primary things that I typically see. The first of which is a time limitation. They don't have any time to actually work on their business, so they're so focused on deliverables for their clients. So they're doing too many things, and the agency owner is actually the bottleneck. That's for a number of different reasons, but more often than not, it's a financial limitation from a revenue perspective, or they're not billing the correct amount. And so they never really factored in the cost of actually delivering, um, aside from themselves, which they think of themselves typically as a free expense to the business, right? Because you can more work for them doesn't mean more of an expense, and they didn't really plan appropriately for that. And also, there's the creative component of it as well. And then ultimately looking at it as, is this being done exactly the way that I would be if I were to have done it? And largely, different people are going to do it different ways, and they get locked into doing and being part of the creative work, so they never spend time actually growing their business, which leads to that revenue growth limitation. One, differentiation is a huge component of this, where they are in this kind of race to the bottom because most agencies sound the same. And I would challenge any listeners right now to take your top 3 to 5 competitors, take the branding off of their site, and read the copy side by side. All of them probably sound exactly the same, including yours. So your prospective client is in a place of, well, how do I choose? Then the only way that they can is based on price, because there's no differentiation. And then there's this kind of limitation in belief that and self-doubt, really, that I can't charge that much for what I do. And so this belief system that they don't have value in what they're doing, and so they never charge what they're actually worth. And then largely they're kind of waiting by the door for more referrals. They're not really marketing. And when they do actually try, and the vast majority have tried something, they give up before they actually have results. And I will say to anyone that's been in that place, the vast majority of channels do work. It's about actually focusing on that channel long enough to allow for you to be able to actually allow for that to work. I would bar running ads for a lot of agencies, because there's a cost limitation to that. But that's the other main piece. And then the other third biggest issue that I see is profitability. So standard average across the industry is between the 8 to 12% net profitability, assuming that you're actually paying yourself. And this is I get agencies that'll come and say, "Hey, I've got a 75% margin," but then they're not on payroll. So that's largely you're not. What if you were actually paying yourself a fair wage for what you're doing? After that, you're in the 8 to 12%. So largely, they're not charging enough, and so they're very limited profits, kind of razor thin.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that sounds familiar, and there's a lot to unpack there. But it's what? Why do you think so? There's a element of confidence, isn't there? There's confidence in terms of knowing your true value and actually reminding yourself as to why you set up the business in the first place, because you feel you have something to offer, very valuable. Um, but then also there's that thing about feeling, you've got to be turning the revenue over, turning it over. So, but why did kind of, I suppose, why do people fall into those challenges, those traps, so to speak, that you talk about?
Well, there's a couple of things that I think happen, and the first one I'm going to hit that I think is kind of really fraught throughout the industry, especially in like the creative mindset, is I think society by and large, and the creative themselves actually doesn't appreciate the creative mind enough. Um, Personally, I know to be true that innovation, creation is founded in the creative mind, and that in order for society and for the world to progress, that it actually takes a creative to allow for us to invent new worlds, new possibilities. And that I actually think is what creates the world to be a better place. And society hasn't recognized that. And I think the creatives actually haven't owned that piece. It's like looking at what kind of impact you have had on your clients and on their businesses and on the world by and large as well, recognizing that what you've done, the ideas that you've come up with, the creative that you have been involved with and your actual hands have touched, have had a tremendous amount of impact. And if you look at it from that perspective of what impact have I actually had, you'll see the world in a very different way. And then largely there's the component of not having enough leads. So when you're in a place where you feel like you have to sell every single one, you're kind of always back-footed. And when you are not able to be selective in who you're working with, it creates this fear that if I charge more and they say no, then I'm not going to be able to make payroll. I'm not going to be able to pay myself. I'm not going to have the revenue. You're just telling yourself all these things that ends up making you, like I said, back-footed.
Yeah, it's a shame, this thing about creativity and seen as being the softer side of the world, the softer side of business, and even the reference of soft skills, those highly emotional intelligence skills, which leads to innovation, empathy that leads to innovation, that leads to solving problems, are often overlooked for the more hard skills, the more central skills that are typically not connected to creativity. But you're right; it's so many great problems are solved by fantastic creativity.
I mean, I'm married to a fine artist and a creative, and like I'm absolutely just fascinated by one, the creative mind and how it kind of works. Like I'm a massively analytical person, right? Like I am not the creative mind, and I've tried to facilitate that part of myself and being able to build it. And quite frankly, I wasn't. And I can do creative oriented things, and I'd like to approach business problems from a creative viewpoint. Um, but it's the creative mind is absolutely brilliant. And I think ultimately the path to a more peaceful, empathetic, connected world is actually through creatives. And big part of my mission is to help creatives, feel more emboldened in what they do themselves and ultimately have society appreciate the impact that they have as well.
And that's, I suppose, that creative passion that comes from people setting up their creative agencies, their creative businesses, then comes up against a roadblock, doesn't it? That roadblock being, well, we need to be commercial, we need to be generating revenue, but we all know, of course, that if you can offer true value by giving your true value to a client, then your kind of, I suppose, route to success is probably going to be easier. Although you do have those daunting moments, which are, yeah, we've got to make payroll, so I therefore got to go with these things. I mean, I've seen it a lot, where people will, businesses and individuals will decide to go for some business, even though it's not quite the right fit, and they do end up regretting it because,
Every day, probably.
yeah, well, yeah, it's probably. Let's see. I think let me just check my app. I think it's happened 1,332 times since the morning in the US. It's yeah, it happens a lot. You're absolutely right. It it is a real shame. I mean, goodness me, this conversation could be probably 2 episodes, but I think, and we can always come back to stuff. I think later on. Um, but if we go back to the kind of the premise, the topic of the episode is that how bearing in mind everything we've said, yeah, how can agencies find their soulmates? We touched on some of it already, but I think it's worth spending some time on this about how do you find, if it's a dream client, how do you find the dream client? How do you find your soulmate in terms of clients? Because we know when we work with people, it's absolutely brilliant. Often that's down to chance, though, isn't it? So, what's the secret?
So I think a couple of things. One of the things that you mentioned that I was made a note and kind of starred was this kind of idea of need, right? Is that we need to be commercial, we need to do things this way, we need to be this kind of agency. And I want to just really hit that really hard. One, you don't need to do anything, right? You're the business owner, and it's ultimately what you want your business to be. And what I want you guys to start to every listener today wants you to start to think about is the client actually needs you. And I'm going to repeat that just for dramatic effect because the client really does need you. You're the catalyst, you're the tool, you're the resource to their end objective. Without you, they would not accomplish it. And most agencies kind of start off back footed here where their belief system is that they need the client. And sure, you do too, but they really do need you. They wouldn't be able to have the success without you. And to get to answer your question is I want you to actually start to think about who that client is in the first place. And the vast majority of agencies that I come across haven't done the work that they would suggest for their clients. They don't have a developed persona. They don't know how they would work together. And what I would suggest is spend some time going through your client roster over the past couple of years. Who have you actually truly enjoyed working with? What work did you produce that you just were so incredibly proud of when it actually went live? Who were those people and what did you actually enjoy about the relationship? Was it the industry? Was it the work? Was it the type of work? Was it the relationship? Detail all of those things out, psychographic, demographic information of that particular person. The thing that happens so much is that agencies are trying to be a chameleon. They're trying to be the everything to everyone. And when you're in a position where you're entering into a sales conversation and your response is how high do I need to jump, and that prospective client isn't being nice to you, do you really think that you're going to turn that client around? Like, this is them at their best. They're in a negotiation standpoint. This is them being their nicest. This is when they're going to be the most compliant. This is when they're going to be the nicest that they'll ever be in the relationship. And yet you're saying yes to them when you feel you have those red flags going up. You're feeling it in the pit of your stomach. Like, I don't think that this client is going to be good for us. And ultimately, what you're doing is you're saying yes to this client that's likely not going to allow you to say yes to the person that you should be working with. So, at the crux and foundation of it is, who is that soulmate client? What kind of work is going to make you excited? How do they think? What do they do? What is the work that you're doing with them? And kind of getting back to the reason why you started your agency in the first place. The vast majority of you were great at one particular thing that you were doing. You got a client, you were started off freelance, you eventually kind of accidentally ended up as a business owner because you got more clients and then you had to hire someone, and now you are where you are. And it's getting back to that thing, the reason why you started doing that first client. What was the thing that had you excited about in the first place? And let's get back to that.
Yeah. Otherwise, what is the point? You end up being your own worst employer because you're you say you should be calling the shots. It's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult to make what are could be seen as quite bold decisions, but I was talking to Pete Rice, who I used to work with when we were both at Havas People, and he is executive creative director, and talking about touching on the stuff you're talking about, which is, if if agencies know what they truly stand for and what they enjoy working on, and they express that in the right way, then there's more chance they get the clients that are suited to them. There is more of a match made. Whereas, as you said, you cover the logos of many websites and they all sound the same. So, how can clients decide who is right for them? And maybe this is a bit of a pipe dream, but you'd hope then there's less beauty parades done, but actually clients go out and actually decide to, pick only, say, maybe half or a third of the agencies that they go out to actually try and, pitch for their business.
There's a couple of things that I think that you said in there that I think are really important, and I 100% agree with the conversation that you're having with your prior employers. That ultimately, I think that what a lot of agencies should sort of start off with, right, is that you start with the wrong question when you're thinking about differentiator. Is how do I actually sell my services? Is the first question that's being asked, rather than why am I even selling it in the first place? One of the first things that I have every single client that I work with start with is, why do you do what you do in the first place? And I just have them write down their story, and no filter, no nothing, just go through and write their entire story down of how did you end up in the place that you are today? Why, of everything possible in the world, did you choose this particular job, do this particular thing? Why? What is exciting to you about it? And if you're able to actually create an understanding first in this know, like, and trust component, and that's the core foundation of any sell, is that the client needs to trust you. And if you're able to actually have them understand that your life objective, the thing that you enjoy doing, the reason you get out of bed, is actually in alignment with their outcome, the thing that they're looking for, you're going to have that built-in trust, and they're going to be more likely to want to work with you, and you're going to be able to find that soulmate client a lot easier. The other thing that you kind of alluded to a little bit that I think is really important is, and that bothers me a lot about this industry, is that you go to websites and they're portfolio oriented. And I'm sorry to break it to all of you, but your client isn't buying your art. They're not. As much as it's beautiful and glorious, they're buying it as a utility to help them achieve a business outcome. And you need the context by that. If you're having, and it's purely subjective, right? If I can look at a piece of, no, I can look at a website or I can look at a brand, but if I don't understand the context behind who that ideal client was that you were actually creating the brand for, then I don't have the context necessary to evaluate the actual art that you created. And that context is incredibly important, and why it needs to be more case study oriented than portfolio oriented.
Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff here. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Imagine the number of hours that would be saved if this was done more up front. Oh my goodness, the pitch hours that are spent on doing things that ultimately are a waste of time because you're just doing it for the sake of it. You're joining the beauty parade, and literally thousands of hours, which equates to God knows how many euros and dollars and pounds. Not to mention the morale of people spending all that time pitching for the wrong business, and they end up being, is it, a close second. there's a there's a guy called Robert Mayhew that's been on the podcast. He's a
Mm-hmm.
agency guy for 10 plus years, and he's a comedian on TikTok as well, and he does agency sketches. And he often mentions a thing about getting the phone call from somebody. Oh, it's them. We're going to get the news, and then it's,
Thanks.
oh yeah, we came we were a close second. Now that's funny, of course, but it's funny because it hurts as well. It's funny because it's painful because yeah, the demotivation you can have by the long hours. I'm sure there's, even today, there's a few hundred people who have worked until 2 o'clock last night or 12 o'clock last night, working on a pitch, and they may not win that pitch.
100% happens every single day. And I would say probably more thousands than hundreds, but 100%.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. In London, anyway, maybe, or that even that's stretching it. Probably thousands. London is a big town. It's a big town. Um, so just to kind of lot, this is all really valuable stuff. I think I really like it. Let's just dive down into a bit more of the detail, I suppose. But kind of what does that soulmate, that kind of dream client relationship look like?
Yeah, it'll be very depending on the person, but what I would say is a couple of pieces that I would be thinking about is first it's the communication, the based relationship, right? Nobody likes to be in a position when you're working on, let's say, a brand, for example, and the client is directing every single piece of it because they don't feel like they can trust your direction. And so fundamentally, they actually need to have a belief in your expertise. Like you need to be the advisor to them, and that relationship needs to be there at the core of it. And if they don't, then you're not going to have a fruitful relationship long term. I mean, I think largely, and this is personal to me, that you need to have a friendly communication and relationship with this person, right? It's someone that you actually want to have and spend time with. I can guarantee pretty much every single person listening to this podcast has either experienced right or is experiencing right now or have experienced getting an email or a phone call or a text message or a Skype message from a client you don't want to work with. And you're like, ugh, them again. Like you don't want to be in that place. You actually want to be thrilled to get on a meeting with a client, to go through the work that you're actually doing, to be able to strategize with them, work with them, and be in a place that you're really getting energy out of the work, right? And so that's one of the other pieces too, is the excitement in the work that you're actually doing. Really being passionate about what you're talking about, either the service, the industry, the thing that you're actually working on with this particular client, and really get a thrill out of it, right? I mean, you're spending a very large portion of your life. And my core fundamental is if I'm going to spend time doing something, I better enjoy it. And if not, then why am I doing it? And I need to make a change here. And you should be enjoying the work that you're doing and be excited to do it. And I ask my clients to rate themselves every single week on every single month on this, but to be thinking about how many times this week did you wake up of like, ugh, I don't want to go to work today. I don't want to work on that project. I don't want to do that thing. If it's happening more than once a week, like we all have bad mornings and like I didn't have a little bit of low energy today, but if that's happening regularly, there's something about what you're doing, either the people that you're working with, the work that you're doing that is draining your life. And you want to be in the exact opposite position. You actually want to be excited, elated, even to be able to be on a meeting to work on a project. And if you're not in that place, then you're clearly not working with who you should be. And as an agency owner, it's up to you to change it and be working with someone that you enjoy working with.
So true. I think personally, I try and kind of have that person myself on my shoulder, going, you know, remember why you've remember why you've made the move. Remember why you have your own business. So when it comes to those scenarios where you could like hold back and let something flow, wash over you, you actually go, no, I'm doing this for a reason. So it's good to kind of have that internal conversation with sometimes, and just to remind yourself that yeah, you've got into this for a reason. You got into it because you love what you do, and surely it's not too much to ask that.
We're not on this planet long enough to spend our lives not having fun. Personally, my belief.
And clients see that, don't they? If they see the fun that's coming through, then that obviously connects to trust, connects to connects to confidence, both sides.
It'll energize your client, right? If you're excited, passionate about it, they're 100% gonna have more confidence in you, and it's just magnetic, right? When you enjoy what you're talking about, you're going to be a better salesperson. They're going to have more confidence in you, as you mentioned, and it's just more fun for everyone involved, really.
Now, say we could be talking for much longer, but I think probably the next thing to say is you've written a couple of books, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've written two books. One called The Agency Blueprint, that's more intended for the agency owner that is in the 1 to 2 million plus in revenue, and how to extract and really understand which components of your business that you really want to be involved with. I talk about my journey in entrepreneurship and working at agencies, and how to get back to that core. And then my book, The Practical Agency, is oriented for agencies that are in that 150,000 plus, to how to grow your business and get back to the foundational components that you need, the building blocks that you need to get to that 7-figure line, and ultimately have fun while doing it, and how to simplify your business and not be everything to everyone.
Yeah, lovely. Well, I'll make sure to drop in links to those books so people can have a look and find out a bit more. And yeah, it's spend a bit of time reading that, because I think it would be a nice follow on from this for sure. Um, Last question, right? Just a short one, but I get it sometimes. Where I see a WhatsApp message from a client, and it puts a massive smile on my face. It's like, yeah, that's the reason. That's the reason I do what I do. Um, you got a situation where maybe as a client talked to you recently about their kind of happy moment. No, don't have to name any names, but a scenario where they've had that. Yeah, you know what? I'm doing it right.
Yeah, what one that came up actually a couple weeks ago. So there was they were actually working on a pitch that they ended up winning, and a substantial win for the agency in a retainer of a 60,000 odd per month. And while they were actually going through, they brought the creative director into the project, and the actual work that they were going to be doing, the company that they were going to be working with, they were so incredibly excited about it that the creative director, one of the designers, worked for like 2 hours, and they typically do not do any work on spec, because I'm fundamentally think you should be paid for it. But because they were so incredibly excited about the work, that they ended up doing a little bit of work on spec, and showed it to the prospective client. And it was just like this perfect sort of marriage between the work that was inspiring to the agency and to the team involved, and the client was just so incredibly blown away by the work that they were doing and where they were headed already, without all of the information and discovery phase. And that excitement, that passion, had led to them winning the deal. And it was more about that than it was really about the spec work, is because they were in the right place with the right person and speaking to the right person, that just led to a really phenomenal relationship.
Lovely. Well, that's exactly what it's all about, isn't it? So, really appreciate it, Robert. It's been a good chat. Yeah, thanks for joining. If anyone's got any questions, pop them into the comments.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're both here to answer them. And yeah, have a good day, everybody. Thanks, Robert.